The study suggests climate change is the most likely cause and highlights that rapid urbanization and a limited drainage infrastructure contributed to turning the extreme rainfall event into a human disaster. My name is Corey. I am a climate communication specialist and I am chairing today's call. So today we will be hearing from 4 authors of the study. They are Dr. Joyce Kimutai, Center for Environmental Policy, Imperial College in London, UK, who is going to start off with an introduction. Then Mr. Tiro, a researcher at the Botswana Institute for Technology Research and Innovation, who will give us a deep dive on the description of the event. Dr. Ben Clark, a researcher at the Center for Environmental Policy, Imperial College, who will guide us through the results. And finally, Professor Pitt, Department of Environmental Science, University of Botswana. So once the panelists are finished, we will open up for questions. If you have a question, as the panelists continue to speak, feel free to put it in the chat and also feel free to raise your hand. I will hand over this to Joyce. Over to you, Joyce.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Corey. And thank you everyone for joining us today in this press briefing. So I'll just start by giving an introduction. World Weather Attribution is an initiative that was formed to answer the question of the role of climate change in the immediate aftermath of an extreme weather event occurring. So human-induced climate change, as we know for a fact from many decades of research using many independent lines of evidence, is caused by burning of fossil fuels, oil and gas, and to much or a smaller extent, deforestation. So in a WWA study, we look at specific regions and we look at also specific seasons to see how climate change plays out locally, interaction with local vulnerability and exposure. So we, more times, we have a slightly different team working with people in the area, even if you don't see them today in this press briefing. So we use peer-reviewed methods, even if the study itself is not peer-reviewed. So today, this study that we're going to release today, is looking at the role of climate change on extreme rainfall that affected parts of southern Botswana and southeastern South Africa, which led to widespread and localized flooding around Gaborone and other urban centers in that southern part of Africa. And indeed, as our climate continues to warm, which it is happening now, is that it's understood that this climate is likely to hold more water, and then and the result of that is intense rainfall. So it's likely to cause intense rainfall, which is likely to overwhelm many systems, including drainage system or drainage infrastructure in cities, especially if it has not kept pace with growing population and rapid urbanization that we see in most cities in the global south. So I'll now hand over to Tiro Kemelang to give us a description of this study. Over to you, Tiro.
Thanks, Joyce. So yeah, I'll just go over the description of the study and then give a bit of a background of the weather system that kind of gave us the rainfall. So what happened is we had a tropical low developing over the Indian Ocean, I think around the 8th, 9th of February, which then started moving eastward or westward over Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and then Zambia. And then when the westerly wave or the easterly wave got to the eastern parts of or northeastern parts of Namibia, it developed into a tropical low. And then over from the western parts of the subcontinent, we had another system, a westerly trough coming in from the west. And when it interacted with the with that law that had developed, it caused the significant rain that we found or that we saw falling over most parts of Botswana. So we started receiving the rains over the western parts of Botswana around the Gantse Kgalagadi area, where on the 18th we received over 235 millimeters in 24 hours over in Kokosa, which is like close to in the Kgalagadi district within the Kgalagadi desert. And then the system started moving eastward, where now it started bringing rain over parts of the southern district into the southeast, which are the catchment area for the Limpopo catchment area, of which the Gaborone Dam falls in. And then around the 18th into the 19th in Gaborone, we received over 100 millimeters of rainfall, and then aggregately over the 5-day period of when the system was in place over the eastern parts of Botswana, we had over 300 millimeters of rainfall recorded at the Gaborone rainfall station. I would like to point out that this 300 millimeters is quite significant because on an annual basis, the southeastern parts of Botswana will receive like 450 millimeters of rainfall, which means that for us to get like over 300 millimeters in just 5 days is quite significant and a rare event. That's around the 18th and 19th. That's when now we saw significant flooding over the Gaborone area and then on the 21st, that's when now the Gaborone Dam started spilling over. And then now we had flooding along the Ngotwane River, which is downstream of the Gaborone Dam. I would like to point out that during this event, we had like several fatalities. I think 9 people died during the event, and then there was quite extensive damage in and around Gaborone, as well as I think we had 3 border posts that were closed because of flooding in the rivers there. So I think the one other thing that I would want to point out is that this kind of event is quite rare. So the last time we experienced something similar was in 2017, after the tropical cyclone Dineo made landfall, and also kind of propagated eastward. We also had another similar incident in 2000 after tropical cyclone Elin. But the unique thing about this event is that the law that developed this time around kind of moved further west as compared to the law that gave us rainfall in 2000 and in 2017. I think at this point I'll hand over to Ben, who will just take us through the methodology of how we kind of now link this rainfall to climate change. Up to you, John, or Ben, sorry.
Thanks so much, Tiro. So that's really helpful context. And as Tiro has said, I'll just run through the hazard analysis, so our methods and then our results. So first, to study changes in any extreme event with global warming, we have to come up with what's called the event definition to characterize that extreme. So we aim to make that as relevant to the actual impacts as possible, so that it's informative for changing risk in the region. So that event definition involves a couple of things, in particular the time period over which the event occurred and the region. So as Tiro has alluded to, the data showed that it was a multi-day accumulation of rainfall. So we decided to look at the changes in the 5-day annual maximum rainfall. And for the region, the impacts of this event were widespread, covering large parts of southern Botswana and parts of the border with South Africa. So we settled on a large area covering that entire region. So to summarize, we're looking at changes in the 5-day maximum rainfall over a large region over southern Botswana and the border with South Africa. So to do this, we use the normal approach of World Weather Attribution, which involves both observational data sets, so historical observations of weather, alongside climate models. So first, starting with the observations, we assess the return period of the event in the present day. So that's the likelihood of such an event occurring again. And across different data sets, we actually found quite large variation in the return period. So anywhere from a 1 in 10 year event to a 1 in 200 year event. As Tiro said, this is quite a rare kind of event. So to compromise between these estimates, we look at changes in the 1 in 50 year event. While there were large changes in these return periods, the actual trends in the data, so when we look at changes in extremes over time, all of the observed records show very, very strong and consistent increases in the likelihood of such rainfall extremes. So we then, as I've mentioned, we include climate models alongside these observations. So climate models simulate the global or the regional climate with steadily increasing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Before we can actually use this data, we have to compare it to observations to make sure that the climate models we're using are realistic. So we discard any that can't produce similar extremes to the ones we've seen. But once we have selected those that can, we run the same analysis as the observations. We look for trends in these extremes over time. And finally, we combine both the observations and the climate models into one kind of overarching attribution statement. So just to summarize the main findings, as I've said, the observations showed really strong increases. So we have, witnessed increasing trends in rainfall over time. However, the climate models, which are all different versions of the climate, if you like, have quite a mixed picture. Some show decreases in extreme rainfall with warming, some show no change, and some show increases. And in essence, that adds a large amount of uncertainty to our final results. Despite that, however, given that we have, based on the observations, seen a very strong increase over time, and that we know from our basic physical understanding that in a warmer atmosphere, there is more water that can then fall as extreme rainfall, it would also be wrong to say that we don't know anything. So on the balance of evidence, we conclude from the data we have here, the evidence we have here, that the present day global warming did amplify the rainfall leading to flooding this year in southern Botswana. But unfortunately, it's very difficult for us and impossible with this evidence to quantify exactly by how much. But we are confident that it was increased by climate change. So lastly, we do also look forwards into the future. So looking at changes in similar extremes, just with climate models at higher levels of global warming. So at 2.6 degrees, so double the warming level we're at now, which is roughly what the world is on track for given current policies. The majority of climate models do show an increase in such events, and compared to the present day, the kind of best estimate of that is that such extremes will become about 40% more likely and 3% more intense. So yeah, just to summarize, on the balance of all the evidence we have, we do find that such events are becoming more likely and intense as the world warms due to greenhouse gas emissions. But that is just the summary of the hazard itself. And there are, of course, other factors that play into an extreme rainfall event turning into flooding that has impacts on people, which are the vulnerability and exposure of the local area. So I'll hand over to Pete to expand on that.
Thank you, Ben, and good afternoon. It's my pleasure to take over from Ben and talk about exposure and vulnerability. I hope I'm audible over there. I think we should all know that the landscape of Gaborone as a city has changed. If you look over the last 10 years to 20 years, the rate of urbanization has increased, and also the population growth rate has also increased. And because of this, they have outpaced the ability to develop the infrastructure, particularly for drainage in and around Gaborone. So when you have the amount of rainfall that is received within 5 days, or even more importantly, some of them coming within 1 or 2 days, then you definitely will have floods that are happening within a very short period of time. And this is also complicated by the fact that, you know, there are some areas in the city that are in a low-lying areas. And this is where it all started, where most of these buildings, they were inundated by lots of water. And in some cases, in other buildings, you've got cars that were trapped within the parking lots, because when urbanization brings in a lot of pavements, a lot of buildings, and this really are capturing water for a short time, and then the water is ponding and is not able to infiltrate. So that causes a lot of flooding. And then even more to that is that we've got these other areas that are highly populated, for example, your shopping complexes. And in this case, you've got the risk of exposure is quite high. And you talk about the residential areas, you talk about the commercial areas. And, you know, these are the cases where they were hardest hit. And in most cases, and especially on the 19th and 20th, you had the Gaborone Dam, which is really close to the heart of the city and upstream of the city for that matter. It filled within a day or even less than 24 hours. And it was coming from about 50%, and all within 24 hours, it filled to capacity and even overflowed. And we are talking about a very troublesome dam that, you know, the last time it filled up, it was in 2017, as Tiro said earlier on. So it doesn't normally fill up very easily. So for a dam of that magnitude of about 144 million cubic meters to fill within 24 hours, it means that there were a lot of water that the system could not carry. So really, in terms of preparations, it means that the infrastructure was not adequate to take water out of the system. And even more importantly, you see, land use planning is quite important, particularly to deal with a huge amount of water that should come out of the city. So I think when we look at the situation, especially in the city of Gaborone, you see you've got some of the places that are built in low-lying areas. Is it a question that we didn't know about it? I think that is just a planning issue, that sometimes enforcing some of these regulations is not there or is inadequate. So I think when you mix all this plus the amount of water that comes, it's another problem. And then lastly, you've got the problem of people that are disadvantaged with low income capacity. So in terms of adapting quickly or being able to recover after this shock, their capacity is quite low compared to those that are in high affluent areas within the city of Gaborone. So this is also another area that we saw as part of the vulnerability within the different groups. And I think we've also heard that in some of the areas, people were evacuated. And it's in total, I think the figure that is quite quoted is about 1,800 people that were evacuated and given the disaster assistance by the disaster institutions. So you can actually see that this was one of its kind that was so high that we were not really prepared in terms of the infrastructure. I must hasten to say that there have been a lot of improvements in the infrastructure development in Gaborone, but I think it remains to be seen whether that is adequate to transmit water out. So I think it can improve more. So I think in terms of the recommendation, before I give to the chair, I think for us to cope with the effects of climate change, especially in the future, because the future points to increased extreme events, we need to expand and upgrade some of our urban drainage system. And because when we do that, we should also bear in mind that we need to increase the maintenance capacity of this infrastructure. Some of this infrastructure have been built more than 20 years ago, and so they are not able to cope with the high extreme events that are similar to the magnitude of what we have. So also in terms of scientific advancement, we need infrastructure that are called nature-based solutions. These are your permeable surfaces and also floodplain restoration, where they can enhance infiltration of water than just being carried out over a short period of time. We also need strong land use planning and enforcement. This is quite important in our country so that we don't find ourselves having to deal with people that are still building in low-lying areas. And then even more importantly for us scientists, and also for when you look at the situation that is before us, the investment on early warning system is quite relevant, so that people can know well in time and they can be evacuated before it becomes too late for them. So I think, as I summarize, I would want to say investment to resilient infrastructure that can cope with climate change is quite urgent. And I must also say that if we need to cope with the effects of climate change in the future, all of us need to come on board. It's not only a government issue, it's us also as individuals, that when we are called to come out of these dangerous areas that are low-lying, we should be prepared to do so, so that we can all be safe, because at the end, we need to be safe even in the midst of disaster and also the natural disasters such as floods. I will now give it back to the chair in case there are any follow-up questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all the authors who have presented here. So we're going to open this up for questions. So if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat or to raise your hand. I think I'll kick it off with the first question. Seeing that this flooding, actually these deadly floods affected parts of Botswana and parts of South Africa, I'd be curious to know, is there any collaborative work being done between Botswana and neighboring countries to address cross-border flood risks and shared best practices in flood management? And in general, just a general also outlook, given the way Africa is and the way our borders are, and in the instances where flooding that happens in this country crosses into another country, what are some of those collaborative management risks that are being put in place, or would propose to be put in place? I don't know who I would hand this to. Perhaps, do you think, Joyce, you can do this, or maybe Dr. Ben?
I think Tiro is well placed to handle this.
Tiro, okay,
especially the cross-border, managing the cross-border risks.
Tiro?
I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer it, but I think what I know is, like, we have the I can't remember the full name of the group, but there's the Limpopo River Basin team, where we have like institutions that are based in all countries that form part of the Limpopo River Basin, that usually come together and discuss issues around planning and management of resources within the basin, especially looking at water resources. So I would want to believe that there are discussions in place to prepare for such events when they happen. But yeah, I think I don't have that much information as to if there are any like active collaborations that are working, but I know of such platforms that exist. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tiro. I don't know whether there's any Joyce you'd like to add on.
No. I just wanted to say that I think I don't know how the SADC, the Climate Prediction Center for SADC is but I would imagine that they could be doing sort of joint advisories or looking at the because that's what happened in Horn of Africa, where we have ICPAC, which is more of the regional climate center, where we have occasional sessions where different forecasters or meteorologists come together to sort of look at risks that are cross border. So they have a severe weather. There's a severe weather program and station in Nairobi that they coordinate sort of activities within the region to see to give advisories on time to the region. And then there are programs and coordination activities in the region that sort of addresses these cross-border risks. So within the IGAD, which is the Horn of Africa Governmental Authority, they have programs that they sort of coordinate and respond to risks that are more cross-border, as opposed to those that are confined within the national territories. So I would maybe I would talk about East Africa, because that's where that's where I understand some of this stuff exist. Yes, but I think Pete could have an answer.
Yeah, no, thank you, Joyce. Yeah, I was just going to add to you, colleagues, that yes, indeed, I think we must understand that issues of climate are handled by government under the relevant ministry. And also to note that the Department of Meteorological Services, whom I think they are in attendance, they deal adequately with those issues, and even more importantly, have bilaterals with the neighboring countries, but also forums that are within SADC, for example, the SACOF. I think that is the Southern African Regional Climate Outlook Forum. So this is where they gather to look at the weather outlook for the next months, seasons, and quarters. And I think those are efforts where such issues are discussed. But in terms of the exact details, I think we'll leave it to them, but the structures, the forums are there, and I think they are adequately addressed. It's just that disaster, when it comes, you see, it doesn't matter what you have done, but if it is more than your capacity, there's little you can do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pete. Opening the floor to questions. If you have questions, please raise your hand. Victor Kwabe, over to you.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you, authors, for the presentations. They are quite insightful and informing about the details of what's going on the ground. Well, first, I would like to share condolences for those who have lost their lives in the floods and property and everything. And then my question would be, what has the perception of the public been about the floods, because maybe there was information about it from the Meteorological Services Department about the floods that were to be coming when the rain began. So what was the perception of the locals, and what are some of the measures that they had put in place while preparing for this rainy season? And then now that they've been met with the floods, what can they look forward to? I mean, what are some of the services that the government or some of the institutions and NGOs are coming up with? What are some of the programs they're coming up with to then support the citizens during these dire times? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kwabe. I think we can go to Shreya.
Hi, this is Shreya Dasgupta from Monga Bay. My question is, I just wanted to confirm if the study has been able to conclude that climate change has increased both the frequency and intensity of rainfall events like the one in February, or do the climate models explain part of the changes in trends? So that is one question. And secondly, are there specific examples of the kinds of infrastructure changes that you would like to see in cities in Botswana that could strengthen flood resilience of the cities more as in the near term future?
Thank you so much for those two questions. So for the first question,
Hi, Corey.
sorry. Hi.
Hello, hi. Yes, I can't raise my hand. I'm in a bad space, but I have a few questions. Can I go ahead?
Okay.
Yes.
Sure.
My first question is what was the turnaround time for this study? Because it's a rapid study and it has to be conducted as rapidly as possible, near real time, if that could be doable. What was the
I think we lost you, Baboki.
now?
Sorry, we lost you a bit. Could you repeat the question?
The second question was about challenges encountered during the study, because from what they said about the methodology, they were using climate models and observational data. Most of the time we hear that data is a challenge when it comes to issues of climate and climate attribution in our continent. Was that an issue that was encountered? And my very last one is to
I think we just lost that bit. Baboki, if you don't mind, maybe you can put the last question in the chat. And so because we'll just, sorry, could you post it in the chat if you don't mind?
No, it's okay. I'll pause here. I don't have the device that I'm using. I don't have access to chat right now. Thank you so much. I'll listen to the responses.
Thank you so much. I think we will start over with your question. So Joyce will take that question. And then after Joyce, we're going to have Shreya's question answered by Dr. Ben on the intensity of climate change, whether that's the cause for the floods, and then the question by Kwabe on the perception of the floods and what to look forward and the interventions by the government. I think Pete and Tiro can take that. Over to you, Joyce.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you, Baboki, for the question. So first of all, so WWA, the World Weather Attribution Initiative, what we do is that we intend to answer the question how and to what extent climate change has played a role in an extreme event that occurs. And we try to answer that question as soon as it's still in people's minds. Because we want to communicate the role of climate change, but also we want to raise awareness on risks and how climate change is actually modifying risks associated with extreme events. So what we do is that we use peer-reviewed methods. So we use methods that have gone rigorously under review. It has been published, reviewed by peers in the field and published. And we deploy these methods quite quickly to help us actually achieve the goal of the initiative, which is to answer these questions as soon as in the aftermath of an event. So of course, so what we do, because we've been doing this rapidly, and we try as much as possible again to bring in local experts, as we have said. We have Tiro here, as we have Pete here, is that we mobilize, we talk to experts to give us their take on what has actually happened on the ground. Also to explain the local climatology, because they are the experts and they understand the climatology of the region even better than us. And in that, we try to look at which data sets that are available. So there are data sets that are quite available, publicly available, and there are data sets that we have to liaise with the locals or the Met Office locally to access them. And in this case, we did that with the locals, Tiro and Pete, and we got to access some of the data that we used for our analysis. So yes, there are challenges of data, but we because the way we've set up the initiative and the way we coordinate and liaise with the locals, we ensure that we can access this information and data as much as possible, and we use that. Of course, there could be challenges in other regions where we don't have access to data, or we don't have networks or existing collaborations with the locals there. So it could be a challenge, and in those cases, those studies can take relatively longer than the rapid 2 weeks that we do. And if we don't get access to the data, we use the locally available data. But importantly to say as well is that before we use any climate models, we make sure that we evaluate them to make sure that they are fit for purpose, so they are able to replicate the extreme event at hand, or the extreme event under study. So we do, and these peer-reviewed methods actually allows us to do this quite rapidly, because we deploy them. We learn from we've been learning from our experiences, from what we'll be doing, and we can now quickly do this. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. I think Dr. Ben?
Thank you very much. So I guess I'll just address the question of, so I think Shreya's first question. It's been a challenging study, so I understand why you've asked this question. We're concluding is that as the world warms, we see these extreme rainfall events becoming significantly more intense and frequent. We have not been able to put a number on the role of climate change in that, if that makes sense. So we haven't been able to quantify the effect, but as the world is warming, we are seeing more extreme rainfall events like this one. I mean, I hope that answers your question. It's something of a nuance. We can't firmly, quantify this effect when our climate models give different answers. Unfortunately, we're not completely sure why that's the case, given the timeline of the study. We don't have time to dive deep, and I think further research is, this study really highlights that further research is urgently required in extreme rainfall in this region, given the strength of the trend we're seeing over time with warming, and what our climate models show are not in alignment. I think it would be really useful to untangle that further. We just haven't had time to explore that here, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. So the second bit of the question that Shreya had asked, I think, Pete, you can answer that, as you also addressed the question that Kwabe had asked on the perception of the floods, and also the interventions that the government is putting in place for the communities.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, actually, on the perception, I was going to say it's a very tricky thing to gauge at this level, because no intensive study has been done on people's perception on such events. However, we could actually hear people on the ground speaking things, and you can see one of them is in the chat. I think it's coming from Kifilwe Mukautsane. That the challenge with public preparedness was the inaccurate information that kept coming from Met. I think that those are some of the sentiments that people could feel, that maybe Met office ignored the warning that came, and the information got to them very late. But those are people's perceptions on the street, and maybe isolated, could not be generalized until such a comprehensive study is done. And then the one on the infrastructure, I think that to me, what really matters for now is to upgrade the storm water management drainage systems in the city. That's number one, because some of them are actually dilapidated, and some of them were not meant to carry such water from huge urbanization rates. And then secondly is to do with the roads themselves. If you look at how the city is, some of the roads are actually in low-lying areas, so they could be raised through flyovers, because if we don't do that, if the next flooding comes, we're likely to have a lockdown similar to what we had during COVID, where people are not able to move, despite the fact that in their area is better, but they cannot come to another place because the roads are closed. Bridges are also very important, that they can be upgraded to keep up with the facilities and other things. As I said, those are the nature-based solutions where you increase a lot of infiltration through perforations of some of the pavements. And I must conclude by saying, in terms of data for meteorological assessment in Botswana, I would actually give credit to Department of Meteorological Services, because you see they respond in times in terms of giving data to the scientists. I think even for this particular study, within that short period of time, they were able to give observational data that we made use of to come to this finding. So I give credit to them in terms of data availability. Thank you so much, Chair. Oh, maybe lastly, it was still linked to a question from Kifilo Mokhaotsani, I think at the end, was saying how then do scientists help with communicating the information during the midst of flooding or because of climate change. I would be quick to say, you see, the communication of information about disaster at a national level is the sole responsibility of relevant ministries in government. For example, even if as a scientist, I can see what is happening, I don't have the authority to communicate that to the public. The best I can do is to publish what I have in fora like this one, where I'm at liberty to share information. However, I think when we build strong early warning systems that, for example, can be displayed on TV every hour or every minute and information dispersed, people can respond to that and do the right thing by being evacuated. Thank you so much. Maybe Tiro can.
Yes, yeah. Tiro, do you have anything you'd like to add on that?
I think no. I think Prof got it put it well. But I think one other thing that I would like to maybe mention is that one thing that we may need to invest in is there's this concept of climate services, like improving the climate services that we give towards the public. So I think so far the Met Office is doing well in issuing the warnings in time, but now how that is translated into action, that's where now we need to start really thinking hard on how to, if there are any gaps, fill those so that in the future, our response would mostly be proactive instead of being reactive to such kind of events. I think that's the only thing that I would want to maybe add. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I cannot see other questions. Going once, going twice. Great. So this is just a reminder that the recording of this briefing is going to be shared to all participants who had registered for this. And the materials that have been sent are under embargo until tomorrow, 2 p.m. Central African time. So I don't think there's anything else, not unless any of the authors would like to add on something else. Or I can see there's a question that has come in. So many areas in low-lying areas, such as in Gweta, are always affected by floods, but no one seems to engage those communities to build climate-resilient structures. Should that be left to the government alone? Pete, would you like to take that?
Yes, thank you so much. I think in my concluding remark, I talked about two things earlier on. That one, the issue of climate change and also this flooding is for all of us. It's not left, it should not be left to a government alone. That's number one. Number two, I think communication and awareness to everybody, actually, including those that are in the low-lying areas, should be made, because I think for this, because of this flooding, or during this flooding, many people were hesitant to be evacuated. I mean, you know, as people, we don't want to leave our comfort zone, even when disaster comes. So it's a combination of both community empowerment by, of course, institutions that are capable of disseminating information, such as of your High Institute of Learning in Botswana, and also the NGOs. But I would say it's really for everyone, even the traditional leaders in places that you are talking about, Mr. Masobili, I think in Gweta, I think we can engage even the local leaders, traditional leaders, who are better placed to communicate in the same language with the people that reside there. So it's for everybody, Chair, and I submit. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. I'd like to correct myself that the embargo will be lifted at 2 a.m., not 2 p.m., as I had mentioned. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining this. You will receive a recording. In case you have any questions, you can reply to the email that gave you the accreditation to join this. So that's it from us. As we say here in Nairobi, kwaheri. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.